I'd like to bring on our next speaker, and I need to introduce Marcy Jackson, who is the Florida Bar's Administration Division Director. Marcy's been with us now, what?
About 3.5 years.
3.5 years, and she is absolutely great at what she does. When she's finished, you will understand how all the money works better than you ever have, and you're going to get ready to take a test on it, okay? No, there's actually no test, but she will definitely teach you. This is your opportunity. We're going to save some time at the end for questions, but I'm sure she would also be okay with questions during the presentation if it's really important. So, Marcy, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Like Kevin said, my name is Marcy Jackson. I've been with the bar now about 3.5 years. I am a certified public accountant. I had quite a bit of experience as a CFO. I actually also have the title of CFO here with the bar. In association world as well as some private sector activities. So I've got a pretty good extent of experience to draw on from the business side, the not-for-profit side, some governmental side as well. So like you, I have been in a position before where I've had to step into a leadership role, and there's this, huge influx of information and questions that you're going to have just instinctively. So my goal this morning is to run through what I've seen some of your predecessors ask. So I've kind of come up with the list of the frequently asked questions that I get from section leaders. I'm going to go through those questions. I'm going to show you what they are so that as I go through them, if you have something else that you see that I'm not planning to cover, you can jot it down and ask me when we get to the end. So what I've generally seen or been asked most often is, where do I go to get the current financial information? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how the bar invests the section's funds, how our investment portfolio works. We're going to talk about how your section reimburses the bar for its management fees and services. We're going to talk about the CLE revenue and how the fees are determined for that and how the revenue is split. We're going to talk about what other fees do you find yourself still having to pay to the bar. We're going to talk about when is your budget due, because that always causes anxiety. And we're going to talk about, okay, what do I do after the budget's been passed and now I need to fix something or change something? So we're going to talk about the amendment process. These are the things that I plan on covering in this presentation. And then I want to leave some room at the end for you to ask your questions on other areas or things that are of interest to you. So let me start off back with where do I go to find out information? Let me suggest that if you haven't recently reviewed your section's bylaws, please take a glance at them. That's the primary, what I call the #1 slot in the hierarchy of financial authority, your bylaws. Who has to approve what? After that, make sure you've had the chance to read at least section 500 and 600 of the bar's standing board policies. These are available on the bar's website. I think Dixie also put them in your handbook. These are the two sections that deal specifically with sections finances and CLE activities. So you want to make sure you've read those. Look at your budget. The budget was just approved by the Supreme Court, so according to standing board policy, right now you all need to be posting them on either on your website or through a newsletter or some sort of publication. You're required by standing board policy to publicize the approved budget to all of your members. Most of you put them on your websites. Some of you still put them in a newsletter, but nonetheless, there is an approved version of your budget that you should glance over so you can get familiar with all the different activities that your sections are doing. The bar produces monthly statements of operations for each of the sections. I'll say with the exception of probably July. July is always such a slow month. We're so busy closing out June that we do very little in July. But starting in August, every program administrator is going to get a statement of operations for your section's activities, and they are to send that to you. It has a report of the revenue that's been received, the expenditures that have been processed, where that relates to the budget that you have, and what your ending fund balance is. That's important information. If you don't get it, sometimes we try to get it done by the 10th of the month, of the following month. Ask them for it if you need it. You all have an assigned program administrator. If none of these answered the question that you had, ask your program administrator. They will be tasked with tracking it down and getting any special information that you need. But if for some reason you can't find your program administrator and it's an emergency and you need it right now, you can call me. I'm at the bottom. I'm the last resort. But nonetheless, you all have my phone number. You can find it out on the bar website. I trick people sometimes and call myself Cynthia, but Cynthia and Marcy are the same person. Please feel free to contact me anytime you need any help or need any special assistance. I'm more than willing to help. Okay, let's start out with the biggest question that I always get is, how is my section's funds invested as part of the bar's total investment program? Well, the bar actually has two investment portfolios. We have a short-term portfolio that's designed to handle all of the what I call daily operating expenses over the next 12 months, and then everything that we don't think we need gets moved over into a long-term portfolio. The long-term portfolio consists of, as you can see, not only the bar's general funds, short-term and long-term, the section's funds, the certification funds, the client security funds, the building and equipment funds. We've got some other entities that we invest money for, like the Florida Attorney, I'm going to say this wrong, Charitable Trust. And then we've got another one that's the Florida Lawyers Association for the Management of Excellence. So we've got a couple of smaller entities, and that's in that gray slice there. So we put all that money is all commingled into an investment pool and invested in a long-term portfolio that is governed by an investment policy that the bar's, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, investment committee has recommended and the board has approved. The Board of Governors has a board committee called the Investment Committee that is chaired by Ian Komisky, and he's been the chair for quite some time. And there is a written policy that outlines by asset class the target ranges that we are to use in investing all of the assets. So what I want to make sure that you realize here is that no section has an individual ownership of any particular stock or asset class. We are all one commingled pool, and we all own the stock together, or bonds, or real estate, or whatever the case may be. We have several different categories. We also do employ and use an outside investment advisor who actually recommends the individual investment managers that are chosen to be in the portfolio. So what will happen is, and he's with Morgan Stanley, he will make a recommendation on a change in the portfolio. It will go through the investment committee for review. If it entails bringing in or taking out any of the managers, we vote on that. It then gets moved up to the board for approval. So the Board of Governors is well aware of the different managers that are all engaged through the investment process. Now, this is literally the day-to-day transactions of how this works. So just like I said, we keep all the short-term money in the short-term portfolio, which is either with Morgan Stanley, BlackRock, or Vanguard. Every morning, somebody comes in and decides how much money came in last night, how much do we think we're going to need to pay the bills, how much are we going to need 2 or 3 days from now. We do a little cash forecast. If we have any excess money, we ship it off to get it invested. If we need a little back, we may hold off on paying a bill a day or two. We get the money back. But it is a daily process of monitoring the cash flow and the cash needs. And all of those are managed in and out of the short-term investment portfolio. And what that allows us to do is to get higher earnings because the long-term portfolio doesn't have that daily activity coming in and out of it. So like I said, the daily cash needs are monitored and ins and outs. And then at the end of the month, we sit down and we reconcile all of those daily transactions and come up with what the balances are for every entity that's involved and has money in those pools. And then we prorate the earnings, or in which case it's been recently the losses, to each of the individual groups based on their prorated share of the total pool. So everybody gets, if we were to go back and look at that pie chart that I showed you a little while ago, based on what your percentage is, that's your percentage of either the gain or the loss from that portfolio. So again, I just wanted to make sure you realize that you are part of a pool There are no individual ownerships of any of the portfolios. We're all in it together. We keep track on a daily basis of how much your balance is in each one of those, and you get your exact, at end of the month, percentage of the earnings or the loss. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, before I move on.
Marcy, can you go back to that?
Sure.
The graph? Can everyone read what the labels are on that graph?
Let me go back.
I think it's important to realize that the purple here is sections.
That's all the sections together.
All section revenue in the portfolio as compared to everything else.
Right. So you're 10% of the total investment portfolio altogether. Okay? Okay. The next question that I get frequently is about the section management fees. Wanted to give you the authority of which all of this is under, and that's the Standing Board Policy 5.56 in that 500 section of policies. And basically what I was tasked to do when I first came to the bar was to figure out a way so that sections felt like they had a predetermined, easily calculated way to determine how much their overhead charges were going to be for the bar. So I did that. Stripped everything down to zero and started all over again. And basically what we came up with that was presented to the Budget Committee and then on to the board and adopted, and I did several presentations in front of the Council of section leaders so that everybody would understand how this was going to work, and came up with this new process. And it's all been codified now and voted on, and we've just finished the very first year of this new process. So all of this will be reviewed as soon as I get a good set of numbers to use for my accounting department, and we'll decide whether or not the fees that we use this first year are truly fair and equitable for both the bar and the sections. And then the way the policy's outlined, if we need to change them, they will be changed in the next budget cycle that you will be preparing starting this summer and fall. So we will not make any retroactive changes. They will all be moving forward. So if it turns out that these fees were too high or too low, we will make the adjustments as we move forward, okay? But basically what this does is it outlines that there is a basic administrative support relationship back and forth between the sections and the bars. The basic, and I'm going to keep saying the word basic because basic does not include CLE events. And basic would not include some special projects that we have discovered crop up throughout the year. But basic is your meetings, your newsletters, your conference calls, your minute preparation, all that basic section management. So it's the staff time for all of that activities. It's the accounting requirements, all of the what I call the website support when you register for a CLE event, all that back office accounting activity that happens, getting your bills paid. And it's also the general administrative overhead, which is the phones and the office that they sit in and the computers and the software that they use, all of that general overhead, the HR department that helps hire and manage the benefits for the employees, the facility management, keeping the staff person down in the shipping and receiving office downstairs. So we take all of that general overhead, and we had to, frankly, in order to get to this, we had to redo the entire overhead allocation for the bar as a whole. So that this number, this general overhead part that's being included in your section management fee is a little bit more equitable and related to the amount of effort that it takes to manage programs than cost. And for those of you that have not been around for several years, you know that that was a big thorn, and something we really had to overcome was the relationship of cost as opposed to the relationship of effort. So everything's now based on effort and measurable times. And the other important thing that I want to make sure you realize is that this rate that we charge you for this management fee is only charged on paying section members. So all of you have those first-year joiners who come in for free. We don't charge you this per-member rate on those members. It's only when you have a section member that stayed with you now in a paying posture that we assess this per-member rate. Basically, what we came up with was 3 different rates. There's a low effort rate, a mid-level effort rate, and a high level because not all sections are the same. Some of you have more activities than others. So that would seem to be fair. So we came up with the 3 rates. And how this works is at the beginning of every year, your program administrator sits down and gets with their supervisor, Dixie, and they come up with a activities plan. We've created a template for them where they outline, I'm going to have this many meetings, and they're going to be in major hotels, or they're going to be in law offices, or they're going to be just webinars, or they're going to be this, or they're going to be that. We're going to do 10 newsletters. We're going to do this. We've got, it's kind of just a plan for the year, just as you would your home budget. And based on that plan, we've quantified it and put in some measures for it. Based on that plan, it tells us whether it's a low effort, a medium effort, or a high effort. And therein lies whether we charge $17.50, $19, or $20.25 per paying member. And it's actually, when you send in your check for your member fees, we actually split it right then. And depending on which section it's for, $17.50 goes to the bar, and the balance of it goes to the sections. So it's not a year, there's no more year-end true-ups, go back, recalculate. It's all done up front, okay? That's kind of important. And then again, as I just said, when I finally get the year-end closed this year, I'll sit down and do an analysis of the PD pool and the section admin budget to make sure that the revenue that we collected and the expenses that we put in there are offsetting each other so that the bar's not ending up with a bigger loss or a bigger estimated support than what they should have had. Or that we don't end up with too much money, because that's not the goal either. The goal is to try and come up with a fair and equitable way to reimburse the bar for what it costs the bar to support the sections. Is that clear? Does that make sense? It's easily measurable. It's something you can figure out at the beginning of the year, and it's something we can track and measure against. Oh, and the other thing that I did want to point out is that we do, in the middle of the year, I sit down, and my department sit down with the program administrators and make sure that what they thought they were going to do when we did the budget is what we really are doing, so that if there is a significant change, we can give you a heads up that something's gone awry, and then we'll start. And we didn't have that, thank goodness, this year, where everything seemed to be on track, and we expect it'll stay that way, but that way there's no surprises. That way you can be prepared for that when you start to work on your next budget. We really need to talk about moving you to a different price level, okay? So we did do that this year. Yes, ma'am. The low is $17.50 per paying member, the medium is $19 per paying member, and the high level is $20.25 per paying member. And it is that way for this year, and it was that way for last year, because we promised we would make sure you knew what those rates were before you start working on your budgets.
Do we get like an invoice?
No, ma'am. It actually happens every time a member pays their fee. We actually take that one payment and split it between the two entities as the fees are paid. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
So you said that the program administrator sits down with Dixie and kind of looks at what the activities are supposed to be. Is leadership involved in that? Because, so for example, this is the first year of health practice has decided to do a section retreat, which is a bigger, expense. Is leadership involved in that discussion about what the activities are doing?
Well, my basic understanding from the large number of years that I've had in association management is your program administrator should be well aware of those activities. They're involved in your planning processes, so I'm pretty sure they're aware of everything that's going on.
Seems like that discussion might happen before the leader is in place. Yeah.
Again, we really want the program administrators to be responsible for knowing everything their section's doing. So, typically before they even start trying to do these activity plans, they've had conversations with the leadership, I would assume. Tell me if I'm wrong, Dixie, to make sure that they're aware of everything that's on the plate for the year. May not be in a formal executive committee meeting, but I'm sure there's plenty of phone calls going back and forth. Okay? All right, now you heard me say basic because CLE is not considered basic management. Some sections do CLEs and some don't, so that was why we carved them out. And again, CLE events really should be planned and budgeted like with a goal in mind of, is this to generate revenue for my section, or is this to do education at a low dollar cost? You know, there needs to be some additional planning and strategic approach taken with planning these CLE events. So that's why what we ended up with for the CLE events was there's really three kinds. And we came up with this basically after several brainstorming sessions with all of the staff involved. And they said, well, you know, we have joint sponsored CLEs. And again, I'm giving you the standing board policy where you can look to find more details on these kinds of events underneath here. And I'm pretty sure Dixie plans on giving you these slides when I'm done. So you'll have them to take home with you. And Mindy's going to come up after I'm done, and she's going to talk about CLE specifically, so I'm not going to get into a whole lot of details about the different, you know, idiosyncrasies of some of the CLE events. But understand that there's three types. There's the joint sponsored, which means that your section is jointly sponsoring a CLE event with the CLE committee. There are 8 rates that we came up with, so that every time you sit down to plan an event, you can decide which one of these kinds am I having, and based on the activities of that event, what is my admin rate going to be? So it's, again, something we designed to be easily measurable at the beginning of the planning process. So if you've got a joint sponsored CLE, again, you're going through the CLE committee. We're going to charge you the admin rate based on the event components, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. You're going to share in your revenue or your loss with the CLE committee, who is in essence the bar, after you've calculated all of your expenses, after all the expenses have been paid, including the administrative fee. And then in order to do that, in order to be considered that joint sponsor, that's when you can now have your 24/7 on-demand. You can offer that for what we call post-market sales. And again, that's what Mindy's going to talk about in great detail, so I don't want to go into that a lot. But know that if that's your goal, is to have a product that you sell out there online for the next 18 months, you're going to need to structure it so that it's going to be a joint sponsored CLE with the CLE committee. And then I'm going to move to the far other side, because the one in the middle is kind of what we had left over. I'm going to move to the far other side, which is that there are a lot of sections that put on CLE events for the pure purpose of being a service to their membership. They're not in it to make the big bucks. They're not in it to, you know, there's no post-market. It's purely a CLE that they're offering, usually in conjunction with a meeting that they're having to encourage people to come. There never was a good, clear definition of what a section service project is. Or did I do these backwards? I'm sorry, did I put it in the middle? No, it is. Okay, so the beauty of the section service project is that that's considered to be part of your basic management. We're not charging you anything extra for that because you're not in it to make money. That's not the purpose of that event. Okay, so I'm not going to charge you an extra fee for that. We're going to consider that part of your basic management. And then we have these other events that get kind of thrown into the center here, because this is where a section wanted to do a CLE event, and they do want to make money on it, and they do want to have sponsors, but they're really not interested in selling it aftermarket 24/7 on demand. They're okay with just a DVD or a CD or something like that. So that's what that center column is. That's what we call the hybrid. That's the one where, in theory, your section is completely responsible for all the revenue and or the losses if you mess up and don't charge enough, and you were okay with that, then that's, you know, that's your loss to bear. We are going to charge you the same administrative fee whether it's joint sponsored or not. A CLE event is a CLE event. And the reason we do that is because we still have all of the accounting requirements. We still have all of the time that has to be tracked. There's still the office systems, preparation of all the documents. That was why we were so careful in making sure that the 8 rates that we came up with were varied enough to cover the different types of elements that are present in these CLE events. Does this make sense that we have 3?
Should the section titles for the second and third?
Yes, they're flipped. They are flipped.
So just so that's clear to everyone. Section sponsored
And
is the
I'll
middle
fix
column.
that, Dixie, before I send you the final to post. But yeah, I've got them, the titles flipped. But it makes common sense if you think about what is a service program. So that was the goal, was the service program is purely a service to your section members, not a moneymaker. And the joint sponsored is joint sponsored and we're sharing, and the section sponsored is the one where you guys are keeping your own profit or loss. Yes, ma'am.
Is the one that's flipped, the section sponsored, is that part of basic or is that charged separately?
The service project, the one that's a service to your members, is part of the basic and has no fee. Okay? Now, again, like I said, there are 8 rates, and I can sit here and give them all to you, but there's kind of no point in that because you're not going to remember them all. But I want you to understand that there's just like there is for the section management fee, there's a planning form that gets filled out at the beginning of a CLE event, and that's where the program administrator says, okay, I'm going to have this CLE event. It's either going to be in a contracted environment or not. It's either going to have food or it's not. It's going to have a lot of speakers or it's going to have just a few speakers. And all of those elements, or there is the option, because several of you do, it's only going to be a webinar sitting at our desk at lunchtime. So basically, there is a fee for full service, over 5 speakers, full service, under 5 speakers. You see where I'm going with this? So based on the planning sheet, we look at how many speakers are you going to have, where are you having it, what's the effort that's going to be required when you have it, are you serving food, are you not serving food, that type of thing. And then that is the basis for which the related fee for that per hour program, because some programs are only 2 hours and some programs are 2 days. So we did it's a per hour rate. So it can range anywhere from like $1,700 an hour to $300 an hour, depending on which one of those categories it falls in. And again, this is a planning tool. This is so that you can make sure that when you set your registration fee, it's achieving the goal that you set out for yourself. Yes, our section's willing to support this up to $10,000, so we can afford that kind of a loss, but at least this way I know what my overhead charges are going to be. There's no surprise at the end. There are still a couple, you know what, I forgot a very important thing. Making sure that you realize that should your plans change, we don't actually charge the admin fee until the event has taken place, because we understand that many times things change from the time we sit down and draw up the plan to what actually happens. So if something happens and your speakers bail out on you, then the rate would come down when we got to the end, okay? So just know that at the end is when we charge this fee, not all along the way. Let me be pretty quick. There are a couple of other fees that we charge. We do ask that the sections reimburse for their direct expenses. If you actually make the things that we can measure and recover from, the copies, the postage, the credit card fees, the conference calls, any special supplies, if you want special name badges, that kind of thing, we do request that you, if we buy them and you're getting them from us, to reimburse us for that. Sometimes they go out and buy them on their own. If we are using the video editing services of the bar, our in-house video editing services, we do charge a fee for that, and that's when you're making your CDs and your DVDs for resale. And then if there's something that comes up, some unique project, something that isn't ordinary, it isn't basic, it isn't a recurring thing, then we will sit down with the program administrator and the leadership and come up with an agreeable fee for that special project. Okay? So these are not going to be things you see that somebody hasn't talked to you about before. Okay, let's talk quickly about your budgets. Your budgets are due to the and this is all outlined in standing board policy, need to be approved internally by your executive councils before they're submitted to the Florida Bar's Budget Committee. We put a calendar out at the beginning of every fiscal year. We haven't quite done it yet. That outlines the timelines. We give those to the program administrators so that they can help you plan. But basically, you want to try and make sure that somewhere in one of your fall meetings, you're going to have a budget that has been prepared for you that you're going to need to get approved so that it can be turned into the budget committee before its January meeting, and those materials usually go out early January. So you usually have, up anywhere from September to December to get it pulled together and finalized. This year's timeline is going to be a little bit different, and I don't even know yet when, so that's why I put the XX. For those of you who and probably don't realize, we're in the middle of implementing a new accounting system that just went live on July the 1st, and we're not quite sure yet how that's going to move some of the timelines from last year. But again, like I said, it's going to be anywhere in that fourth quarter of this year. Then you need to understand the budget committee looks at it. The budget committee recommends it to the board. The board kind of takes it as a first reading. It does a preliminary approval. Then we put it out for member comment. It gets published in the newspaper. A member can object to anything that they see in there. They have a certain amount of time to do that in, and then once that process is finished, it goes back to the board for final approval and gets submitted to the Supreme Court in June for their approval. And then, again, according to standing board policy, you're then supposed to distribute that approved budget out to all of your members in some shape, form, or fashion, along with the disclosure of how your section's reimbursement policies work for your members. Let's see. So, a couple of things, that are additional questions that I get asked about the budget, and this is one you were talking about this morning. Sections may use their dues and other revenues for legislative activities, so long as your overall budget does not result in a negative projected year-end fund balance. So in other words, we're not going to let you go in the hole. Okay? Not from a budget perspective anyway. Another option that you have, and it used to be mandatory and I've made it optional now, some sections like to set aside some budget funds for unexpected activities. We call that an operating reserve. You can choose whether you want to include an operating reserve in your budget or not. That's up to you. And budgeted funds used for speaker expenses need to be clearly identified for that, particularly if there's some outlines in the CLE policies that are in that 600 section. If you're exceeding those for some reason, it needs to be clearly identified in your budget that you're doing that. And, of course, you can submit budget amendments throughout the year. Budget amendments can either be 10% of your total dispersed. Budget amendments that don't have to go to the Board of Governors. This was some question we had this year. Budget amendments that you want to have done that don't need to go to the Board of Governors for approval. Mr. Harkness can approve. That means that it's no more than 10% of your total disbursements or 30% of your budgeted end fund balance. Once you exceed those, then they're going to have to go up to the Budget Committee and then to the Board of Governors for approval. So you got a pretty good, wiggle room there for amending your budget throughout the year. And trust me, we get to the end of the year and I'm having daily phone calls with the program administrators as they're sending, it looks like you're over budget. Do you need to, And so again, they'll come back to you and say, this happened or that happened, or we need to move money around between lines within the budget. All that's acceptable. Here's my phone number if you need to call me. And so I'm kind of done with my part, and I'm going to open the floor for those of you that have other questions, either to clarify something that I said or to ask a new question. Yes, ma'am.
Could you please go over real briefly that base fee that gets charged to the sections based on number of members, what that covers, since it looks like the section does reimburse for postage, copies, all of the other stuff?
It covers staff time and benefits. It covers all of your accounting needs, all of your IT operations, unless you choose to do a website some other way, some other how. Many sections do. But if you're using our website for your activities, It's covered in that because the software costs are in it. It's all the indirect costs that it takes to manage the section. HR time, the shipping department, the building management, the office systems, any of that general overhead is included, like I said, in addition to your staff time and staff benefits for your assigned program administrator. Yes, ma'am.
How do we know if our section is the high maintenance section?
Trust me, those that are know it.
How do we find that out?
It is in your budget. I mean, the category gets included as part of the budget information, but your program administrator can tell you exactly what you are.
And some of you just know.
Trust me. The reptiles know that they are high.
Qualifies as a section service program?
Okay, there's three criteria. It's that it is to be provided to your members only, that you have no aftermarket sales, and that it's done all in one kind of continuous time slot. So in other words, it's really designed to fit those events where you're having a meeting somewhere and you want to throw in an educational component to attract people to come, and so you're going to give them 2 hours or an hour here or an hour there. I don't want to charge you for an extra fee for that when you're already paying a management fee to manage having the meeting there.
I think one of the things, just for your information, that the appellate practice section sometimes does service programs that bring in non-members, but are still intended to be service programs.
We have a workaround for that.
Okay.
It's called a non-member differential, and it has to equal what a year's fee would be. So in technicality, they're becoming a member, aren't they? Because they're paying the non-member differential? Yep. And we disclose that to them. It's in print on the registration form that the non-member differential basically entitles them to a year of membership.
All right, any other questions?
Oh, yes.
A couple, all right.
You mentioned a management fee. If we are trying to plan an event and are wanting to try to anticipate what the management fee for the event would be, how would we go about determining something like that?
You would work through your program administrator, and they would come sit in my office, and we'll sit down and make sure that they have a clear understanding of what it's going to be.
All right, thank you.
Like I said, there's the form that gets filled out. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'm looking over at the program administrators. We've been doing it for a year. It seems to work pretty well. There's a form they fill out, and it's got numbers on it, and you get to the bottom, and it says, okay, I'm going to have to pay this per hour. Now, usually what fluctuates is the number of hours. You might think it's going to be 10 hours. It turns out to be 8 or maybe 11, but we know what the fee is.
So I guess for an example, let's say we're planning a trip or something, an event that we want to have in the future, and we say, okay, what can the Florida Bar help us do to plan this event? Mm-hmm. But we need to know how much that's going to cost us in advance before we begin going down that avenue of planning the event. So we would reach out to our section administrator liaison to say, can you help us with the amount of hours you think this would take, and give us a proposal for how much you think this would cost us?
Right, absolutely. And the first thing they're going to say is that, well, maybe it isn't even a CLE event. Maybe it is just a regular meeting and you've got a service project in the middle of it.
Right, that's what I'm asking.
And
yes,
they will help you figure out exactly what kind of an event and whether there even will be an additional fee or not.
Okay, thank you.
With regard, it's similar to his question. You mentioned that there are 8 rates. Is there a way that we can get information on what those 8 rates are so we can transmit that to our CLE committee? For instance, the family law section typically has a fairly robust, CLE planning. And I think that would be helpful, especially if there are large differences between those rates, so they can actively make determinations as to what would be profitable and what would not.
Yes, ma'am. Those rates are published in the budget instructions, and every program administrator has them.
Marcy, can you tell us an anticipation for budgeting for our next bar year? What, if any, will the new wage and hour laws have effect on what we're going to be charged?
I'm going to sit here and tell you that I know it's going to have an impact. I don't know yet exactly how much. Terry and I have to I've done a preliminary impact assessment for the board, but I have not been able to get it all the way down to how is it going to impact the section fees yet. I don't think it's going to be a significant increase, but I will be honest with you, the sections are the ones that are going to feel it more than just about anything else we do. And that is because your program administrators are at your demand. And I can't tell you or them that don't call them outside of 8 to 5 because that now makes them eligible for overtime. That kind of throws our whole premise of the management structure and the relationship, out of kilter. So Terry and I and Dixie have got to sit down and come up with some proposals. So we know it's going to have an impact. I don't think it's going to be huge. It's not something I would be too terribly worried about yet. For one thing, it doesn't even go into effect until December, so you're only talking about 7 months of the year. And we don't know yet. It's still possible it might not happen. I mean, I hate to say that because there's so much up in the air with what's going to happen with the election. So we are planning as if it is. I will be working on something, and before you guys start your budgeting process, I will make sure that impact has been calculated and is included.
Would we as the sections have any input to be able to say, well, we would just prefer to go ahead and let our section administrator have actually the higher salary cap so that we don't have to worry about
We have to be fair and equitable, and all program administrators have to be handled the same way.
So we won't have the ability to...
No, ma'am.
To do that.
But that's probably
well, I wasn't going to say that. But that's probably what's going to happen.
Trying for you, Mary Ann.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Marcy. Really appreciate it.